Nachádzame sa v špeciálnej expozícii. Takto vyzeral bunker v Hostomeli, keď miestni obyvatelia boli donútení v ňom stráviť 37 dní. Všetky tieto predmety sú tu autentické a bude nás sprevádzať zástupca riaditeľa múzea, ktorý vysvetlí, ako sa žilo ľuďom počas ruskej okupácie, keď nemohli ani vychádzať von.
Okay, now we are in the National War Museum of Ukraine, and this is exposition Ukraine Crucifixion, the world's first physical exposition about the full-scale Russian-Ukrainian war. And one of the most unusual parts of this exposition is the very detailed and very authentic reconstruction of the civil shelter of Ukrainians, peaceful residents of Hostomeľ, who survived 37 days of Russian occupation in the semi-destroyed basements of Hostomeľ, located very close to Hostomeľ airport, stormed by Russians from the first day of big invasion. In the beginning of this exposition, we can see some broken telephones and also tablet PCs, even hard drives and cameras. Russians were afraid of different informers of Ukrainian army. That's why they took everything which helped people to communicate and just destroyed it. So if people had some older phones or cameras, they were just destroyed. And in general, it had no sense because people had no electricity there. The idea of this exposition was to reconstruct the story of people's survival during these 37 days without light, without heating, in humidity, in cold, without normal food and water, but also, what is most important, under Russian occupations. They were really kept, in fact, like hostages in this place. Their basement was marked with such a white banner. The cradle under it shows us and that many children were among residents. Several dozen people lived in each of these basements in very harsh conditions. Some of them did not survive. We can see here the grave board of the older woman, Lyubov Gritsenko, who died because of pneumonia, because she was forced to live without electricity, without heating, in humidity and cold in February. So in early March 2022 she died, and she was buried only in the middle of the courtyard where she lived all her life. We can go further, and you can see here that in this exposition we use only authentic materials. We even don't use the light except for displays with oral history testimonies, and we can see the light which really people used in Hostomeľ. They lived in darkness all the times, and only very rarely people were allowed to go outside by Russians, or maybe for cooking food, for taking some water, but nothing else. And now I propose you to see some rooms where people lived. Please follow me. You can see here one of the rooms, very small. Even without people in it, it feels like overcrowded, because we can count here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different beds and mattresses. It means that 5 families lived here together, and it was not an easy life, of course, for them. And even here we can see even such touching objects like a bottle of sparkling wine with a very naive but also romantic handmade sticker, and the words "Congratulations on the golden marriage, golden wedding, 50-year anniversary of common life." And some older couple took such a bottle with them as a reminder of their love and their life. There are some inscriptions on the walls which we reconstructed. We don't know their full meaning. They mean Kalinin and Kashin, looking like some second names of people or some names of the towns, but it's uncertain. And it's interesting that in every room we can see the clock, because people lost feeling of time in such conditions. And for people it was necessary to understand in general which day it was, which time it was. There were many children, elder people among residents, and for them living here was especially hard. And an important part of people's life was nutrition. That's why we have some kind of food storage here. Some of food are Russian combat rations. It happened sometimes that Russians brought people their rations, and instead they took better food for themselves. And also we have some food from local Ukrainian supermarket, which was looted by Russians. And people also remembered that Russians brought this food and made people to record so-called Thanksgiving on camera, thanking for this so-called care for Russians. And people remembered that they were demanded to say thanks 7-8 times because Russians needed to sound it very sincere, very truthful. And also we have here one small room. It's very small but very authentic, and it's really very depressive to stay here, even just for a short time. You can imagine that people lived in such darkness all the time in the far corner of the basement. But even in such room we have chess, we have play cards. It shows that people wanted to have some relief and some reconcentration too. But what is also interesting, we have English textbook. We know the story of a teacher who was in this basement, and the teacher gave lessons of English not only to children but also to adults. And they were very popular because for people it was necessary to have some relief just for an hour. And it reminds a lot about the story of a teacher of French in the Warsaw Ghetto, who gave lessons of French until the very end, until the deportation to Auschwitz. Of course, these are different historical conditions and circumstances. It's not so correct to compare destinies of two people, but in general, it shows the motivation of people and this will to think not only about hardships. And of course, icons that gave people some hope, maybe some strengthening of their face in such conditions. Some kind of stove which allowed people to heat some food or water. In general, people were under almost all-time supervision of the Russian soldiers. Very often, Russian soldier sat on that chair, and he controlled people. He watched the people who were in the basement, and people were not allowed to go. They were declared by Russians. If anyone leaves basement without permission, the one would be killed. All people remembered this. And I invite you to the last room, which we have here. In this room, we have a bit more materials about children's destinies. And in general, there was no children room in such basements. Children lived everywhere. But here we have the clothes of the youngest known resident of Hostomeľ basement. Girl was 5 months old, and she survived Russian occupation with her family and then was evacuated to safer regions of Ukraine after liberation came. And one of the most interesting things which people notice here is that everywhere there are toys, because for children, for families, it was very important to save just the small reminders of the normal life with toys, with some kind of house, comfort, and parents tried to create this feeling even minimal for their kids. And also, before we go, I would like to pay your attention to these drawings. They were made by children in darkness. They were very bright, very colorful, and they really show that Children lacked this. Children lacked feeling of happiness, of safety. That's why they depicted their family, happy life, without stress before the war. Now you can say that there are thousands of such stories in Ukraine that can be told about survival of people in such conditions. But for our museum, especially in the beginning of the full-scale war, it was important to show this particular story because we documented it first, and our museum put a lot of effort into saving the history of this war. That's why we created this shelter here after liberation of Hostomeľ.